all news as almost breaking news now, where it could be the smallest thing, but it's has to be told immediately and as quickly as possible because somebody else is already writing it because it's available everywhere. And yeah, it's a strange dynamic. So there are less resources than ever, but you have to do it 4 times faster.
Welcome to On Top of PR with Jason Mudd.
Hello and welcome to On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd with Axia Public Relations. Today, I'm joined by Shelby Bridges, and Shelby is somebody we've been working with at Axia for several years now. Shelby is with Qwoted. She's the head of user success, working at the intersection of PR, media, and technology to help communicators build smarter, more strategic relationships with journalists. She leads training, demos, and user initiatives that empower agencies and brands to stand out in a competitive media landscape. Shelby is passionate about elevating media relations best practices and strengthening meaningful connections within the Qwoted community. Shelby, finally, welcome to On Top of PR.
I know. Yeah, I feel like we've been trying to plan this for a while.
We have, and you've been playing hard to get, but I finally got you.
Yeah, I don't think it's me playing hard to get. I think it's the industry playing hard to get. It's hard to find time.
Yes, no, I understand. Well, what I think caused this was your team sent out a end of year kind of summary for 2025 of what your platform was seeing as far as analytics, performance, and benchmarks. And that seemed interesting to me, and I thought it would be interesting to our audience. So really our topic today is modern media relations with AI, but we want to talk about, to kick things off, really what your report kind of uncovered after doing, I guess, a year of analysis. But first, let's stop because I don't know how well our audience is familiar with Qwoted. So why don't you give them a quick explanation of what Qwoted is and then an explanation of what this these benchmarks, not what they showed, but what you were trying to accomplish in them and what kind of data did it access?
Yeah. So Qwoted is a 2-sided network. One side of the network being journalists, or more broadly put, media users. So anybody looking for an audience, looking for experts and sources to pull into their stories. And then on the other side, we have PRs, we have experts, we have sources who are in here representing themselves. And so it's a nice way to kind of connect the two of those audiences together. I said this earlier this week, and it's kind of funny. I said it and then I was like, oh, I guess it kind of is true. But we sit really in the middle of those two audiences, right? And so we have a very unique vantage point compared to most people, right? You have a lot of PRs where they're like, oh, well, I assume journalists want this. And you have journalists who are like, well, I assume PRs are dealing with this. And so oftentimes what it ends up being is we're like mom and dad in the middle, being like, hey, kids, don't fight, stop fighting. And so how can we help translate what the other audience is going to the other one? And I think there's so much assumed, like, oh, all the journalists are grumpy and angry and nobody wants to work with us. And then on the other side, it's like, well, all the PRs don't care about what we do in our work. And so it's trying to help everybody bridge that gap. So when we put together that end of year summary, it was with the goal of understanding this may be what your agency is going through, but how can you translate that work into what journalists are dealing with every single day? And on the flip side, journalists, this is what agencies are going through, and this is what they're competing against in the space. How can you translate putting your stories together and working with them too? So, of course, a lot of that comes down to like, how are people using AI? How is AI hindering and or hurting you? What does it look like when a journalist is looking for sources for their stories? What do those timeframes look like? How quickly do they need it? How can they verify and vet that people are in fact real, which is a crazy thing to say in this day and age, but that's the biggest hurdle of it all. Like, who's real out there? And I find myself asking that every single day. I didn't realize that a big portion of my job was going to be finding the fakes out there and being like, get out of the network. We want this for the good and the real people out here trying to support one another.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got lots of questions. So first of all, it sounds like you're talking about kind of being like a moderator between the two professions. And, it's funny. We're in the public relations profession. I say all the time, it's time we put relationships back into public relations because, people are so focused on, either publicity or image management and things like that. And it's really about building relationships. And, if not, then maybe you should pivot what you call yourself or how you describe yourself is what I would prescribe to that. But yes, I mean, there is this interesting tension between public relations, media relations professionals and journalists, editors, producers, news directors. And, I think that we're, a friendly and complementary skill set to each other, especially those people I think who practice media relations, who have been in a media employment, worked in a newsroom before. That's one of the first questions I ask somebody is, have you ever worked in a newsroom before? And while newsrooms are changing and newsrooms are almost extinct in many ways, because I know in the metropolitan area I live in, everybody at that newspaper works from home now, and half the staff isn't even in the market anymore, which I think is a sad state of the product that they're producing, to be very candid with you. But at the end of the day, I do sense there's some tension. I do sense that sometimes both parties are more interested in serving themselves than they are, being helpful, meaning that when I just had this conversation yesterday, right? If our client or a spokesperson from a company, Shelby, can't make an interview, and let's just say a podcast like this, something came up, and they have to punt or reschedule or postpone or be late. The odds are that there was a good reason and a higher priority or a higher and better use of that person's time in that moment. It could be a crisis, could be personal, could be professional, could be, an angry shareholder wants to have a phone call, we've got to put the fire out here, or something else is going on. Right. But in my experience, and it happens. In my experience, journalists will have the same, challenges, meaning that a bigger, better story that circumvents this story has popped up. Sometimes that's breaking news. And so I've produced plenty of news conferences, Shelby, where, I've got 3 or 4 members of the media in attendance and they get rerouted somewhere else because there's, in one particular story, there was a hostage situation, 15 blocks away, and they were the closest news team that could go pivot over there and go cover that. And the good news is my client came out of the PR ranks, or started in journalism, then worked in PR, and was now an executive director of this nonprofit making this announcement. And so she got it. There's how do you compete with a hostage situation? You can't, you don't. And so, she saw that we had all the major media there, and she saw that they were either getting out of their trucks or inside the building, and then all had to leave, except for a couple of community newspapers who, they just didn't know what was going on. But my point in saying that is that I do sense, and this is what I was saying just yesterday to somebody, I don't think the scales are even, meaning that if my client or the company spokesperson has to bail on a story, it doesn't feel as equally acceptable as if I got reassigned to something else and I can't do this story today or ever, kind of thing. And so I think that creates a little bit of tension too, is, it's all about reputation, right? If I have a good reputation, or Axia or the agency or the PR person has a great reputation with the reporter, and we say, hey, this happened, that's not normal for us, they're going to be forgiving. But if it's the first impression, right, then that doesn't normally work out well. And it's, at the end of the day, it's also because, and I know you know this, but I'm explaining this to our audience. It's also because that journalist is accountable to an editor or a producer who's going to hold their feet to the fire. And so they're upset about the conversation they're about to have. Whereas I think on the other side of the coin, the executive who turned down the interview probably doesn't have a boss who's going to be like, why did you bail on that opportunity? Like, the executive or spokesperson is probably the boss, and they made a decision based on their own discretion, right? Or their own autonomy, that this was not the best use of my time in this moment. I would love to reschedule it, but I can't be 2 places at once. Do you agree with that theory?
Yeah. I mean, it's twofold, right? Like, on the the expert side, one, it's 10 to 1 for experts, right? Like, I couldn't use you for this story, but there's 10 other experts probably somewhere in the world, at least, that can speak to me about the same thing.
Sure.
But also, like you said, like, yeah, you had to bail on that. Nobody's really holding you accountable because there's not immediate or like instant return on getting earned media, right? Where it's like, okay, we missed out on that article, but like 6 months from now, you do see the ramifications of being featured in these outlets and you see that build up over time, but it's not that instant gratification where it's like, oh, okay, you know, I'm not missing a paycheck because I didn't do this opportunity. And then on the journalist side, it's like, okay, well, that newsroom used to have somebody where they wouldn't have to cancel that interview because there was an emergency, you know, hostage situation, something like that, because there was plenty of people there to cover all of the stories. You know, they just got to focus on one beat. They just got to focus or be in the office. And there was people who did breaking news and there was everybody else. And so now the journalists that are still in these newsrooms, they're covering more beats than ever. They are short staffed. They don't have support or admins. And I think there's an immense amount of pressure for keeping on top of all the stories and the expectations, because just because the newsrooms have shrunk doesn't mean their workloads have. If anything, they've tripled, quadrupled. And then stories now, the way that they're told due to social media and AI and everything else, they're coming out faster than ever. So you have to be on top of that. So it's all news is almost breaking news now, where it could be the smallest thing, but has to be told immediately and as quickly as possible because somebody else is already writing it because it's available everywhere. And yeah, it's a strange dynamic. So there are less resources than ever, but you have to do it 4 times faster.
Right. Yeah. Very cool. So we have so much to talk about today, and I'll try to hold back some of my thoughts as well, because, you know, as you're talking, I'm like, yes, and this happens and whatever, but we want to talk about faster, clearer, more credible modern media pitching with AI. We also want to talk about your study that you did, or research you did. So why don't we jump into that and tell us more about kind of the concept behind it, the data collection that was used, all at a high level, right? We're not data scientists here. So, and then lastly, what were the findings, and then we'll jump into the other topics.
Yeah. I mean, maybe let's talk with I think there's two big pieces of what we see from the journalist side, right? Like, we want to be relatable to the journalists. So how are we getting in their inboxes, and how do we see it? And I think that the two biggest things that we find is, one, those deadlines are tighter than ever. So we're seeing a decrease in the time frame in which they need information for their stories. We're seeing that tick up year over year. Last year was no exception. We're also seeing that even if my deadline is 7 days, that journalists are engaging with responses to their opportunities and their stories faster than, before that 7 days. So even if my deadline is 7 days from now, what we're seeing is most of the time, the people who are responding within the first 48 hours are the ones that are winning. So anything after that 48-hour point, we see a substantial drop off in the overall success rate. And that's just, we took that based on, where we're seeing response and engagement in Qwoted. Obviously, we see every single opportunity. So we have a benchmark of when was this posted? When were the first responses? When did we stop seeing responses to individuals in that inbox? And then when was that actual deadline listed? So those deadlines, even though they're shrinking, I think that there's even an unwritten deadline, even below the shrunken deadline, where it's you've got to be in here faster, and you've got to be one of the first and the most credible in that inbox.
So I'm writing within 24 hours. You said 24 to 48, but we have to pad deadlines. We have to tell clients 24 hours so that hopefully we get it from them in 48. But
if it's 48, tell your client half.
Yeah. But I'm going to add to what you're saying is, we're seeing where, like you said, the deadline's listed as Friday, but then so maybe you get the opportunity on Tuesday. You tell your client we have till Friday. Client takes their time because you didn't give them a tight deadline. They send it to you Thursday afternoon, and then you clean it up and you go to submit it, and then it's reporters no longer accepting. Has everything, however you word it. I know you know how to word it, or how you guys word it, but then you're just like, oh man, now how do I go to the client and explain this? So yesterday I was just telling somebody, hey, there might be a deadline, but that deadline is not the deadline of when they're going to stop accepting pitches or experts. So what do you guys call that when you stop it from accepting new ones?
So, and we actually don't stop it. The journalist needs to go in and they get to essentially indicate that they have what they need. Okay. So there's a little trigger for that. And we get so many people coming into our emails and our inboxes being like, why did you guys let them turn this off? They said their deadline was 7 days from now. And it's like, I can't control when somebody gets what they need for a story. And frankly, like I get that it's frustrating and you planned for the 6 or 7 days, but also nice of the journalist to say like, hey, I'm not going to use what you send to me, right? Like they don't have to tell you that. Like they would just ignore it regardless. So at least they're putting it out there like, hey, use this content elsewhere, recycle, do something with it because based on what I already have, I don't need anything else. And so I think of it as a positive, but some people get so mad and it's like, I understand the frustration, but like, shift your expectations as well because you got to compete. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great reminder for anybody, whether they're in media relations or they're involved in the process or looking to get involved in it. So you mentioned kind of recycle or reuse, repurpose that content. I would love to ask you this question, which is, if I respond to a quoted media request or media query from anybody, and let's say I'm the fit for it as Jason Mudd, and they're asking about, reputation or image or corporate communication type questions. And I answer it and I submit it. How long should I wait to repurpose that for my other content at Axia, would you say? Should I wait at all? Should I wait until they publish? What are your thoughts?
I mean, the word for word publishing, I would say, I wait to try to find when that story goes live to see if you were used or not. Because as we all know, of course, we would love to know that a journalist is going to use our stuff every single time, but that's not the reality. Sometimes they don't even know when the stories go live or who their editor is going to cut or not from the story. So if the exact content itself, but if you can rephrase, rewrite, kind of reconstruct the overall message a little bit and recycle that, I say you can do that almost instantly. We do have a feature in Qwoted, and this is not trying to be like a shameless plug, but I think it's very, very cool, especially as it relates to trending and breaking news, which is, as we know, especially in the last year, everything seems to be breaking all the time. It's like every time I log into Qwoted, I'm like, what's breaking today? Like, it's crazy. So there is a function. So say there's maybe some type of like reputation opportunity, and it's because something's happening in the news cycle. When you go to pitch, there's a little option that says summarize this pitch. And what that will do is kind of showcase you as an expert on that trending subject. So if another journalist is logged into Qwoted and they're writing on that same topic where they're like, oh yeah, this is a breaking news subject, who can write on this? It's helping to elevate your voice to them directly without them having to submit a request to the network, without them having to search for sources. It's saying like, these people are in here already talking about this subject. You should go to them directly. So, we talk about this week, like we've got a lot of oil experts, people trying to understand, are oil prices going to rise? Are they going to fall based on what's going on in Iran? And so those people, as long as they're summarizing and quoted, they've just got kind of incoming direct messages all day long where it's like, hey, I see you're willing to speak on this subject. Can we connect really quick?
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned that feature. I've seen it, so for full transparency, I'm not actively pitching our clients. We have team members that are, experts in that and do that all day long. But I will pitch or respond myself when I see an opportunity that fits my area of expertise and my practice area, or just public relations, corporate communication overall. Yeah. And I've seen that. That's the little checkbox at the bottom when you go to hit submit, right? Yeah. So my question, I've always wondered what that looks like, meaning, and you've described it well, so thank you for that. But meaning I was always concerned, well, if I'm responding to Sally with this and she asked for this, does that mean it's going to 5 other journalists who didn't ask and now they've, gotten a shortcut based on what Sally's covering? So what is the journalist view of that? And maybe there's a screenshot or something that you could show us of what that looks like to a journalist.
Yeah, I don't have a screenshot from like the journalist side, but in your profile, you would see that there's a recent commentary section. So you'll see how it's summarized. So it's not trying to take like that that journalist specific idea, for example. There's just a recent commentary section where you'll see it's using AI, right? Like, and we are 100%, we are on board with AI. It's just using AI properly, which we can dig into that too. Because I think so many people think like, oh, Qwoted hates AI. And it's like, that's not the case. We love it. Yeah. We use it. All those emails you get from us, that's AI. So it's definitely very, very powerful in that it can rewrite it, but it's not trying to strip, that original journalist story idea. It's just trying to say, this person's an expert in this space and they can speak on the following. So when a journalist logs in, depending on their beat, what they've written in the past, there's kind of those overall buckets or trending subject areas to say, because nobody's got an original idea really right now as it relates to the oil prices in Iran, right? But there's a lot of journalists coming in saying, I need experts and economists and all these people who can speak on it. So how do we readily surface those people who have recently been quoted? We can give them a really quick snippet of how that person can speak on the subject, and we can give them a direct outlet to just go to them directly without having to do a lot of research.
Nice. So I'm glad we're covering that because I always wondered how that looks to people. Let's talk about, also the AI thing where you say where I know I can submit and click and say, AI, what do you call it? An AI checker or what's the term?
Yeah. It's just, I think it just says like check for AI on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've got a question about that. I've used that and it's come back and given me a percentage. And let's just say I've gone back in and I've made revisions to my draft, just generally speaking, before I submit it. I've noticed that AI feature button goes away now where it used to stay. What's the rationale for that?
Well, we pay for it every time you click that button. We pay for it. Simply, it is that. No, just like most things in life, Jason, you've got a few bad eggs that kind of ruin the fun for everybody. If we even just look at like AI, for example, right? Like everybody should be able to use AI to pitch, and we should be able to use it in a way where we're not falsifying data, we're not falsifying personas, we're not falsifying companies, and we're not getting quoted in media outlets. And a journalist is like, oh, wow, I just completely quoted a fake company and persona and all this stuff in a story, and now I look like the idiot. So there's companies out there that are building these personas, and they're using ChatGPT on like an expansive level so they would take like a journalist request, they'd plug it into ChatGPT, and then they just copy paste. And so how do we rule those out? How do we say like, okay, based on how the profile looks, based on how this pitch looks, how can we quickly give you those indicators to not proceed with this person or to flag this person to us at Qwoted so that we can remove them from the network? But then the same thing goes for the check AI function. So we have the best intentions behind it being like, hey, our goal is to not rat you out to a journalist. It is to just give you the tools to see like, this is what we're competing against. I've had accountants, I've had scientists.
Snitches get stitches, right? That's what they say. Yeah. So be careful.
Yeah. But I've had accountants come in and say like, I didn't use AI. And it's like, yes, but what you write is very scientific in nature. And it reads a little bit like AI, right? Because it's very, like I could pull that from the internet anywhere because that is a very specific topic that you can't really rewrite it other ways. So there's a leeway of percentage of how much AI should be allowable. It's those ones that reflect as 100%. So then what you have is with these bad actors who will go and falsify 100% of a pitch, they would then go into Qwoted, and we would just see that they would be clicking that AI button 100 times. Oh, okay. And so they're just like, oh, okay, now it's down to 98. Okay, let's change this wording. Oh, now it's 96. And they would sit there, and we've seen like pitches or people that were clicking it, like I said, upward of 100 times just to submit one pitch. And so they get it down to, like in the 30s or whatever. So it looks more human. So then it's like, okay, now we're still incentivizing bad behavior because now the journalist thinks that it's a good pitch. So that's where we have it disappear. Of course, Pangram has free access, and people can go and subscribe to them themselves. They can use their own tools. I think it's really just to give you that really early indicator of like, hey, this is a tool that we support the most out of all the AI checkers out there. Everybody will hear me say these tools are not perfect. There's no way for them to be perfect, but
they're definitely not perfect.
Yeah, but Pangram has the least amount of false positives, which is why we've partnered with them. Who's to say that won't change in a few months? We might have to change platforms again because we were using GPT-0 last year, and that had become to the point where it was easily
manipulated.
You could easily like kind of get past it as human writing. So since it's been, kind of struggling to keep up, that's why we switched over to Pangram. So yeah, long story short, it's not free for us either, but we want to make sure that you guys have those tools, especially maybe you have a client that submitted something to you that was AI and you were unaware of it. It at least gives you that idea to be like, how is this going to look when I submit my reputation on behalf of my client to a journalist? And I don't want to hinder that reputation in any way.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. You're right. None of these tools are perfect to identify. And, I definitely can recall situations where I've written something that's like 100% AI. And I'm like, well, unless I'm an AI bot, it's 100% human right now. But, so those things happen. And so when you submit a pitch or a reply to a request in the Qwoted platform, it goes to the reporter. Does the reporter see some sort of badge or a little indicator of what percentage of it is AI when they view it? No. Okay. So tell me more about that.
They have to hit the button just like you do.
Okay. Just like we do.
Yep. So we give the same tool to them because what we found was that they were using free and or cheap, which means not good tools to check for AI. So then they were flagging things to us being like, this is AI. And we're like, what are you using? Because this is a very good pitch and you should not discount this person. Yeah. So that's where we're like, hey, we'll pay for it. But, let's all use the same one at least so that we're all on the same page and kind of benchmarking the same things here. But they still have to click it. So if they want to use their own, they're more than welcome to do that. We put that in there. They have to click it each time. We don't say up front like what that percentage or anything shows. Okay.
So if mine came back and said 100% AI, is that why I lost the ability to do it again?
No, it's just once you click it one time, it just disappears. So then that way people aren't just continuing to click until they get.
So that's across the board now. From now on, you get one shot to see if it's AI or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, or you could just go to like pangram.com.
Sure. But I'm just saying like, for planning purposes, don't click that AI button until you're happy with your final draft.
Yeah. Or if you see it and you're like, oh shoot, this does look like AI, like let me go and rewrite it. And then I'm going to have to like log into Pangram or something else where just to make sure, or reach out to my client and be like, hey, how did you put this content together?
Right.
So that way you can kind of course correct.
True confession, hi, my name's Jason. I'm a perfectionist. So I submit, I'll play with it multiple times before I submit it, which I think is sharpening the end result, so I've kind of, my process is just to respond to the answers with the best of my ability, and then kind of go through one more time and tighten up my work, go through another time and say, okay, is this what the journalist wanted to hear? So I tighten that up, and then I'm like, okay, am I truly quotable in this moment? And, so I go through different phases of getting just right. But, that finessing and fine tuning and making it 1% with each revision is what helps us get quoted, on the platform and helps us stand out. So Shelby, this is interesting. I'm learning a lot about your platform, and we've been using it for years, and I'm not by any means a power user, but I'm probably using it more than our average audience member is participating on the platform. So as I'm learning more about this, I'm going to check out my recent commentary and see how that presents on the platform. At one point, you guys were using a tool, and maybe you don't have it anymore. I don't know. I never really used it because honestly, I didn't really fully understand the intent of it. And so let's talk about that if you still have it. And that's you were doing like a word cloud of some sort to see what's trending. Are you still doing that? And what's the intent of how your best users are taking advantage of that?
Yeah. So we do have that still. If you are ever in the opportunity feed, you can search, and there's like a word cloud. There's like journalists the most active journalists who have been writing in that. And then there's the top publications that have been writing on that topic in the last 30 days. So it's nice. It's kind of that 30-day overview. I think what's really helpful, especially from the word cloud perspective, is we get so many people in here where they're like, well, there's just nothing for us in here. And it's like, okay, fair. There might not be, right? Because you might be an expert in something so niche and so specific that when you search that very specific thing, that might not be in here. And so when you search that term, giving you that word cloud, it's saying, okay, well, when this topic does come up, it's also associated in these really big areas that we are seeing. Mm-hmm. And so, like my favorite example is there's this man named Matt Harris. We love Matt at Qwoted. He is like one of our like case studies of all time. And I remember originally getting on a phone with Matt and he was like, yep, so my expertise is I'm a Pearl expert. And I was like, I don't know how we're ever going to have opportunities for you. Like I remember distinctly being like, I'm going to try to help you win in here, but this is so niche, that's so specific. I cannot imagine that more than twice a year, there's going to be journalists in here looking for Pearl experts. And so I was like, okay, well, Matt, like outside of Pearls, you do run your own business and you are a spokesperson and you're doing all of these other things. And so it's like, okay, well, you're an entrepreneur, so it's helping to expand. And it's like, well, Pearls are adapted into jewelry. And that year happened to be something where they were talking a lot about, I think it was the year the Queen died. And so they were talking a lot about like the Queen's assets and the Queen's jewelry collection. And so we were able to tie Matt into these other and kind of bigger areas where he can attach it back into his expertise of pearls. But it's not just, I'm coming into Qwoted every day, I'm searching pearls saying, oh, you don't have anything and moving on. And so instead he's been quoted, hundreds of times at this point. He's been in podcast. He had like a 10-page edition or like a 10 standing like edition with People magazine that he plays through Qwoted and like continued to be like in all of these different columns throughout. Like it's just been really, really cool to see. But I think that's where we were like, if you don't know this industry well, or even if you were just coming in and you're like, I got a new client and I'm searching, it's like, oh yeah, Qwoted's not going to work for this client. I'm just going to move on. It's like, sometimes you have to really rein in your client's expertise. And sometimes you have to really expand that expertise to try to get placements across the board. So I think that's where we're trying to use those trending topics and those bigger subject areas to get everybody thinking outside of that small little box sometimes.
So I'm glad you brought this up. Speak to the employee who's working at a corporation in a marketing or perhaps a PR role, and or somebody who's managing a client at an agency where the client says, I only want to talk about pearls. I don't want to be included in anywhere else, only about pearls. What advice might you give to that advisor and or directly to that client, that spokesperson, to help them kind of expand their thinking and be more open-minded to the opportunities? Because you're right, they may not be covering this topic, and that a person probably said to you, I don't think PR or I don't think this platform is going to work for me. Right. And I think they're missing an opportunity. I think you are too. So how would you manage that situation?
Yeah, some of it's the education across like SEO and GEO. You can get really technical with it, right? Where you're like, hey, I understand that you think you're just trying to get in this article. But on the technical side of things, we're trying to get you as many placements as possible. And so when you look at the reality of how do we get more placements, we have to diversify that expertise a bit. The second thing is going to be the relationship building, because, like Matt in that example did, he was helping journalists with very specific jewelry stories and saying like, hey, as a pearl expert working in the jewelry space, this is why I can contribute to this. But then as he's building this relationship and they're like, God, this guy's great, he's got a lot of really good insights, Matt can now go back to them and pitch his stories. And that's how he's getting in People magazine. Like they're not coming to him being like, hey, we've got this pearl feature that we're doing. Right. He was like, hey, there's this, I talk about pearls more specifically if you guys are interested. And that's where once you have that credibility, that reputation with that journalist, and they know that you were so helpful with these other stories when they were working on a deadline or when they were working in very niche specific spaces that were contributing to your industry. I think that's where it's easier to go back and say, yes, now let's talk about what we want to talk about rather than meeting you where you're at. So some of it's just, it's so easy to be in an industry and forget that like not everybody works in your industry every day. You know, it's like I was in the payroll PEO space from this, and I catch myself saying like, oh, you know, I was in the PEO industry, and people are like, what's that? And I'm like, how do people not know what that is?
Right.
And it's like, yeah, because not everybody is living that every day. And so it's the same for a journalist, you know, like most of them are writing across several industries. And so when they have questions about things, or when they are writing stories about things, like they don't technically always know the scope of it. They don't know how expansive that can be, or how in depth you can get, or what your specific niche of that industry might be. So helping to educate them on it and giving them ideas outside of that as you help educate them can be really helpful.
So two thoughts there. What you're basically saying is Matt became a trusted source by offering his expertise more expansively than he initially wanted to or thought he should. And that began to build a relationship. And that relationship turned into additional earned media because of his willingness to share, care, and be part of the conversation and meet a new journalist or contact where they're at. And I want to summarize that because in my experience, my best clients are willing to do that, right? They're willing to be helpful when they know it doesn't necessarily pay off for them. I've talked about this example, but it's a great story. One of my favorite clients was always willing to meet with a journalist. She was in a corporate development marketing type role, but her past background was as a CPA for publicly traded companies. Her company was publicly traded that she worked at. And so she was willing to help journalists walk through another company's financial statements, another company's quarterly earnings report, and help educate, especially a cub reporter, on what this and that means. And and I was so grateful she was willing to do that, because she would spend maybe an hour at a time with a journalist who either she didn't know or hadn't covered them yet, or whatever the case might be, Shelby. And that journalist then began to like her, trust her, and want to come back to her, where maybe she could quote, the reporter could quote her on related stories or tangential portions. But when we had a story, they were like, can I talk to Tyra? And if the answer was yes, then they would be more inclined to do it. And, what's the saying? The best way to have somebody, like you is to ask them to do a favor for you, and vice versa. By doing a favor for them, you build that relationship. So I think that's a really beneficial, way of looking at it. And I was just, and different, speaking of generative AI engines, right? Each one of them values or credits earned media differently. And so some of them are going to reward a expert on the volume of media coverage where they're mentioned. Some of them are going to reward on the tier of the media coverage that they're mentioned. And or others are going to focus on, are they in the industry trade that they're within? So at the end of the day, the best thing to do is to be more expansive and don't say, well, I don't want to do any interviews unless it's, this tier or higher.
Right.
And oftentimes I find the people who want to focus on the highest tier media are the ones that come from the lowest tier company as far as its own credibility, as far as its own visibility. Just because you have no employees, but you want to be the go-to spokesperson for the Wall Street Journal on this particular topic. Kind of a stretch, you've got to build up some reps and credibility and visibility elsewhere. The other thing I just want to say to you, because it resonated with me, is when you tell people about working the PEO space and they don't know what that is, I can't tell you how many times I'm on an airplane or somewhere and somebody says, what do you do for a living? I say, I own a PR firm, or I own a public relations firm. And then they finally go, and what is that? And I'm like, you don't know what that is? Like, how do you not know what that is? So it's a constant reminder.
Press releases? Because that's PR does not mean press release. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Let's frame that somewhere, because I'm a big believer. But yes, you're right. People don't know what acronyms are, and they don't know what our industry is either. And so as a professional in a unique profession, we constantly have to educate people about that.
Yeah. The interesting thing there with the tiers, and I'm such a big pusher of this, because I'll get agencies that say, we don't pitch anything less than this. Or I get, agencies say, like, my client won't be featured in anything less than this. And I think such an interesting piece is, one, we just talked about newsrooms shrinking, right? So where are all these journalists who lost their jobs going to? Like, they've got to be writing somewhere. They're still in the industry, but also there has been a huge tick up in the number of freelance reporters. And what that means is you have journalists writing across all tiers of publications now, rather than just writing in-house for the Wall Street Journal. So even though that journalist is maybe writing for Chewy.com today, or something that, is maybe not the brightest, shiniest thing you want to share on your LinkedIn, they're so grateful for you meeting them at that low tier, because then when they do have the top tier opportunity and you're in their inbox again, they're going to be really grateful that you helped them out for the not so flashy publication. Yeah. And so I think so many journalists, I have journalists in here sometimes where they're like, hey, I'm writing for, this is for the New York Times today, but I just know people are only going to pitch me because it's New York Times. So I'm just going to put freelance on it. And so it's a lot about researching your journalists and understanding who do they write for, because it could be a much bigger story than you even anticipate. They just are trying to hone in on the traffic and the people who are there for the right reasons of putting out credible information, and not just, I'm here just to pitch you because I need to be in the New York Times. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to support what you just said with this. We had a client once featured in the, his product featured in the Daytona daily newspaper, the Daytona News Journal, I believe it's called. And a reporter at the Orlando Sentinel read that newspaper or saw the article or whatever it might be. And then he wrote a story, his own story about that same product. And then from there, the Tampa Bay Times journalist saw the Orlando Sentinel's article and wrote about the product from there. Now, before social media, we would have said this is viral, right? This is going viral through news coverage, right? Yeah. And this story was after social media, of course. But my point is so it went from Daytona, which most people would say, that's a low tier, media outlet in a small market. But then it upscaled to, it went up to Orlando, then it went up to Tampa. From that Tampa story, the LA Times picked it up. They saw it in the Tampa newspaper. So then the LA Times wrote about it. And from that, ABC in New York City saw it. And ABC in New York City did a national story for it. And then from there, they pushed it out to all of their 250 network affiliates at the time across the United States. So one pitch in the backyard of where our client was based, right, to tell his story of innovation and entrepreneurial and product development, turned into this viral moment that it just went all, uphill, if you will. Now, if that client would have been, either arrogant or just uncooperative or unwilling to invest in the process, would have said no to that story, would we have gotten the traction that we got from that? I don't know. The other thing I would say to support what you're saying is, that cub reporter has to start somewhere, right? And if they're good and they get good stories and they tell good stories and they get connected to prominent individuals, then it's going to keep going up from there. Yeah. The only thing I would just caution people about that is we have a client in Tampa and he's just buddy with the hometown newspaper business editor where he lives. So suburban Tampa has a weekly newspaper and he likes the business editor there. And I keep telling him, I'm like, we cannot go to that guy first and tell him your big story first. We have to take it somewhere else and get it covered. We're talking national news, right? And so if the local community writer, and I won't say the name of the publication, the business editor covers this story before, the Tampa Bay Times does, or a bigger outlet does, because this guy's been quoted many times. Our client, we've had him quoted in the Wall Street Journal, but he's always wanted to give an exclusive to the guy he likes that's down the road. And I'm like, the guy you like down the road can wait 3 weeks,
Yeah.
So, so you have to kind of think about it that way too. If you have something is good, go straight to the best outlet you can probably. But if you're building a brand and visibility for yourself, you've got to start slow. And just another little quick anecdote is we have a new client who's based in Orlando. They only serve the Orlando metro market. And we're like, that's going to be small and tight, right? So, and Orlando is a competitive media market, just like our clients in Atlanta experience, in New York and Houston and other places, San Francisco, LA. So we've said to her, look, it would actually be easier for us to get you quoted in national media than to wait until the Orlando media market is going to cover the type of story that you're an expert in. And so jury's still out. I don't know. I'm not involved in the account, but I just remember hearing this conversation, like we've got to persuade her that even though she might not immediately benefit from national media as much as she would something in her own backyard, right? We've got to build her trust and visibility and credibility where we can. And there's no reason, Shelby, as you know, that she can't remarket and repurpose this content on her own social, her blog, her website, email blast, et cetera. And then when the Orlando media sees that she's cited and quoted in national media, then that will build up her credibility. So when they are covering the story, she'll stand out a little bit more from them. Yeah.
Please remarket the coverage. Please. That's my takeaway from the last thing you just said. So many people don't do that. They're like, oh, great, I got featured. And that's it. And it's like, we can repurpose this in so many ways. And please do that, because that's only going to improve the ranking. It's only going to improve the eyes on it. It's only the journalist is going to be so grateful. That does not happen probably, I would say 8 times out of 10.
We could have a client featured or quoted or mentioned in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, whatever it might be, maybe even CNBC. And the number of their friends, families, neighbors, and contacts that will see it is so small. Even though millions of people saw it, it might not be the people that are connected to them. But we get them in that hometown newspaper, like I was describing just a minute ago, and all their friends at the golf course, country club, Rotary Club, neighbors, family, kids, whatever it might be. People at the grocery store will see them and they'll be like, man, that really worked. And it's like, yeah, it worked. No doubt about it. Right. And so what I tell my team and our clients, if they're open to hearing it, we want to spend 5 to 10% of your PR investment that's for media relations going after the stuff that will be seen in your neighborhood or in the hometown where your company is based, because that's going to be the boost of your anecdotal experience that tells you the power of media coverage and the power of the visibility that's there. Now, most clients will say, oh, I only want national tier 1 media. And I tell them, well, that's not who's always going to buy from you. And that's not always who's going to support what you're doing as much as the industry trades will, or the consumer enthusiasts that are more micro and niche focused. This episode is brought to you by Audible. Enjoy 30 days free of Audible Premium Plus by going to ontopofpr.com/audible.
You're listening to On Top of PR with your host, Jason Mudd. Jason is a trusted advisor to some of America's most admired and fastest growing brands. He is the managing partner at Axia Public Relations, a PR agency that guides news, social, and web strategies for national companies. And now, back to the show.
All right, so let's pivot now. Let's talk about your research that you did.
Yeah, I know. So we mentioned the pitch timing. Obviously, that was one big aspect of it. Another piece is the volume of pitches. And I know, as you guys as paid subscribers, when you go in to pitch, you can see the number of pitches that you're essentially competing against before you submit yours.
That's a paid feature.
Well, you can see it on the free version. You can see it after, but it's kind of discouraging because you're like, oh, I just sent that and there was already 20 pitches there or whatever. So what we were trying to determine is what's the journalist threshold for how many pitches they're willing to receive or that they want into their inbox before they start to kind of vet and verify those pitches. I was pleasantly surprised by this. And maybe it's not so pleasant. Maybe it's probably speaks to a couple of things. So what we've seen is the average ratio for when a journalist in Qwoted will go in and say, I have what I need for this story. That's gone up from last year. It's 7.6% or 7.6 pitches right now, not percent, but 7.6 pitches on average is when a journalist will say, I got what I needed for this story. The prior year, it was 5. And the prior year from that, it was like 4. So that threshold has gone up. And so I think it tells us a few things, right? One, there's probably more pitches out there, but there's probably more junk that's being pitched. Right? There's those immediate pitches that people are sending. There's so many people that are not mindful or cognizant of what a journalist needs and what they're working against. And they're just kind of spraying and praying all day long and just saying like, hey, my client's available. And it's like, why would anybody respond to you? And I want to turn around sometimes and send that pitch to their client and be like, look how these guys are representing you. It's poor behavior. It's hurting your reputation and theirs, but I'm not here to be anybody's mom. But then on the flip side, I think it also tells us that now a journalist has to take a lot more into account when they're cross-comparing pitches from one another for the content. Like, what do I feel comfortable using in my story? They're they want to look at more. They want to say like, okay, how can I for sure tell that these people are real? How can I for sure see that this is not AI or slop, like you said? How can I compare the bullet points that I received? And are all the bullet points in every single pitch that I received the same? And do all of them say 100% AI? Because I'm not going to use those, like it's all like AI, and like just using AI to come up with your responses it's an echo chamber, that's just scraping. From
you see that? Do you see that on your end, that the pitches are the same, the content is the same? Yeah. I wonder if that's because they're using A, free accounts, B, they haven't trained the AI to their voice and done, created a custom GPT, which we do for all of our clients. We create a custom GPT. And then I also wonder if it's because, most people are still using, and there's nothing wrong with that, but Chat GPT, as opposed to using, Claude or other platforms that Perplexity that might produce a different outcome. But that's interesting. Yeah.
I also think it's just, I think you can tell when you say like, hey, here's my thoughts. Can you put this in my tone of voice? Can you write it this way? And you have a coached LLM versus somebody who's like, hey, give me the 5 bullet points for this. And it's like, the one example I have is, it was a bathroom opportunity where it was like, what are the 4 lowest cost, like quick and easy changes you can create, like add to a bathroom as like a renovation that make it feel more homey or something like that. Like it was very, just like it was just like an interior design opportunity. And there was 5 pitches in there. There was more than 5 pitches, but we went through and we combed out. The journalist had pointed it out to us and she's like, there are 5 pitches in here that all have the same exact 4 bullet points. Wow. Now they all sound different, right? Because they have different language, they have different, but their bullet points are exactly the same. And like some of them, right? Like change the hardware. Sure. Like I'm sure a couple of other pitches had change the hardware, change the sink, do these things. But what all 5 of them had was the last bullet point. It said, hang a sprig of eucalyptus on your shower head. It's going to give a nice earthy, homey feel. And it's like, that's odd. One, like how many bathrooms has anybody been in and there's a sprig of eucalyptus on somebody's like shower head? That's not really a renovation. That's like a touch up or like a decorating thing. And so it was just so interesting that all 5 of them had that. And so what I did was I took the same prompt, plugged it into ChatGPT, and sure enough, it gave me the same 4 bullet points back with the sprig of eucalyptus, and it just put it in my voice. So it's the same pitch. It's just the generic, like written in my voice, but it's generic and it's not, it's not these new original thoughts. And that's because these LLMs, they don't have original thoughts. Like that's what the journalist needs, is something that stands out, and it's not generic. Like if they wanted generic stuff, they could go search it on an LLM too, and then say like, hey, can somebody add to these other generic ideas I have? So it's, we met with Gab Foray a couple of weeks ago, and she's amazing in the AI space right now. I think especially as it relates to comms professionals and just really helping comms professionals coach and train their LLMs. Because a lot of it, I do think, is a lack of just education on it and how your pitches look. But she's like, put diamonds in, get diamonds out. Like it's not junk in, junk out. It's also put diamonds in. So put some original thought and ideas in there, and then have AI poke holes in it. Have AI rewrite it for clarity, but not change the tone of voice, not make it sound so generic, but like have those original ideas still. And those pitches are going to stand out, where I think even if that shows 80% AI, but it's completely different and original thought, a journalist wouldn't even look at the AI detector because they're going to say, this pitch looks different. Like it's different thoughts compared to everybody else.
Yeah, I like that. Well, Shelby, one thing I want to do is kind of educate our audience for a minute, because you talked earlier, and I might have missed my opportunity to mention this, but you said, in 7.6 pitches, 5 pitches, 4 pitches. I think it's important to educate our audience that, good journalism, the standard is still, although not as honored as it used to be, a mandate of having 3 unique sources for every story that you write. So it makes sense that, maybe they were looking for 4 and then 5, and now they're getting up to 8. And the key thing, you said it, and I think it's so true. They're looking for 3 sources. The way you stand out as a source is to have a unique point of view from what everybody else is saying, and not just regurgitating what ChatGPT says you should say, right? And so I heard you say this idea of putting in your thoughts, or collecting your thoughts, put into your point of view, your tone, your voice, and then ultimately produce a better, more unique pitch. So I tell clients all the time, you want to be early. You want to say something provocative, contrarian, unique, so that you're one of the 3 sources they use. Because if all the sources they talk to say the same thing, it's like a lottery. It's a what do you call it? A random drawing who they decide to include, and it might just be the first 3 people they heard from, might be somebody they heard first, middle, and last. But you want to make sure you get in their inbox early with your response. And something I'd like you to talk a little bit about is diversity. I tell clients that diversity is important too. Many would say that it's no longer the same level of criteria it once was, based on the political environment we're in today. But diversity is still good storytelling. It's good journalism. It's good to hear diverse point of views. I look to hire, diverse expertise and experience at my agency. And if people in the room all look like you, you're not going to hear as good or thoughtful storytelling and insights as you might want. So when we talk to clients, we talk about the importance of diversity of experts and spokespersons. If they're all, white, middle-aged or older males, you won't be as competitive for the media opportunities, where again, if they're picking 3 sources, you want to make sure you're saying something so interesting you get quoted no matter what. But if all things are equal, they're going to look to have diversity of geography, ethnicity, gender, and other things in their article. So you have some data points about this.
Yep. Yeah, we've definitely seen, of course, in 2025, at the beginning of the year, there was a huge uptick in conversations around DEI, but that was also what was happening in the political environment. And so we saw a drop off in the DEI kind of tags, everything over the course of the year, but that's because it did have a sharp uptick at some point. But then what we started to see is that when journalists are posting requests in Qwoted, we're seeing that there's a significant increase in their demand, specifically asking for a type of audience. Okay. So rather than just saying like, hey, this is open to everybody to pitch, they're saying like, hey, specifically for this request, I want a BIPOC individual. I want a member of the LGBTQ community. I want a female. I want a woman entrepreneur. So you're continuing to see these more diverse tags where they're saying like, specifically for this, I want these individuals to contribute. And that's not to say like, oh, hey, only pitch, your female experts or something like that. But it is to say like, you should have a diversity in like the spokespeople that you have available within your brand or your company, because they do, like you said, they offer different opinions. And I think it helps make a more well-rounded story for what journalists are looking at. When we look at, and I could share my screen too, if you want.
And while you're doing that, good journalism is not just talking to people on a national story that are from the state of Missouri, right? You want to diversify who you're talking to geographically. If you're running for a political office at a national level, let's say you're running for president, you're not going to pick a vice president who's from your state or the neighboring state, even though that might be the best person for the job. You need to be inclusive of other markets. And that's what good storytelling is. And so I see you've got the slide up here.
Yeah. So this just shows, over the last 2 years, going up until like July-ish of last year, where we're seeing that continued uptick in the demand for different individuals for stories. And so that's where, like I said, in the request itself, the journalist is saying, please have a person from this group respond. Like I want to hear from these different diversity groups and hear these different connections and individuals. if we just look at it from a gender perspective, so this is male versus females being pitched inside of Qwoted. So for every opportunity, this kind of just shows us that, over the last 2 years, males here are the orange line. So we've always seen that males have been pitched more frequently than females within the platform. Over the last year, we've seen a greater disparity in that, where we're seeing that even more now male voices are being pitched more than female voices. So this is almost like a 2-to-1. So every 2 men in your inbox, you only have like 1 female voice. But like we said, journalists need to have a more well-rounded story. So when we look at this from the success metrics, it flips the scales. It's saying, even though that the males are being pitched more frequently, the female voices win more often. So we see higher response rates, higher engagement rates, because there's less female voices in the inbox, and it's helping to drive up that success because the journalists are seeing a new, unique, more diverse voice there. So, yeah, like I said, this isn't saying like, hey, only pitch your female sources and representatives. But I think when you are coming across opportunities, I think it does help to be able to put different feet forward for different types of opportunities and kind of change your voice. And again, make your pitches more well-rounded. It's definitely not something we see changing anytime soon. And I think we just continue to see a greater demand for journalists just saying it up front, like, hey, I already have 5 male voices for this story. So now I'm putting out the request to say, I need a female voice, or I need an LGBTQ member, or something like that. So continuing to see that drive up is, I think it's really positive. And, some people find it frustrating because they're like, well, I have a perfect source for this, but he doesn't fall into that community. And it's like, the journalist has plenty of sources from that community right now. So save it for the next one,
Or just make your pitch better. Because it is a competition. And so if you're going to be competitive, if you want to be in that key media outlet or any media outlet, you want to bring your best work, or just don't do it. If you don't have the time to do it right, then don't do it at all. Thinking about those charts you showed, and I will request Ava to embed them into our episode notes, where we'll put a link to your study, if we can get that, and the other brand names that we mentioned that somebody might want to look into. We'll put those in the episode notes, which will be available at ontopofpr.com/Shelly-Bridges if anybody wants to jump in there and check it out right away. But looking at the chart you showed, where it kind of followed, it looked like, more responses or more coverage. I'm also gathering that you probably put some sort of line graph in there that would show the growth of your platform that would kind of be on the increase, just like that chart was, right? I mean, meaning that's a reasonable assumption that, as you were showing the chart going up in a very positive way, as far as the direction of growth, your company's market share probably and number of users probably increased equally.
Yeah.
And then there was another chart in there that you had, the second chart. And unfortunately now I'm forgetting because I don't see it in front of me, but I also had another thought there as well. Can you put that back up real quick? But like I said earlier, if you're listening to this and you have somebody who's not very diverse as a spokesperson, it doesn't mean you still don't want to include them. So, so I was looking at this kind of for that dip that you mentioned. And it looks like the dip happened, according to what I'm seeing, before January 2025, and then kind of picked up a little bit.
Yeah. And then what we see here is in January of 2025, that's kind of where a little bit before, back in like October 2024, is where we started to see this spread or greater disparity of just the genders in general.
Okay. Yeah. And so this is the one I was thinking of, your market share, your customer base, has probably increased. If you put a line in there, you'd probably see where it's also going up in an increasing direction. And then was there a third slide you also showed?
Yep. And that's the success rates here.
Yeah. So that was interesting to me also, just kind of looking at, overall the success rates are decreasing, which again, I think shows, like you said, they're accepting more pitches, number one, right? Because you shared that data point earlier. Number two, your market share is growing of people that are on the platform. So I think a lot of that is, very interesting kind of thoughts to consider. So I'm glad we spent some time looking at this. And like I said, if you're listening to this on the audio edition of our show, you can certainly go to ontopoffpr.com/Shelly-Bridges, and we'll put the images there for you to be able to see those there and kind of catch up to what the video version is sharing. Shelby, what other high level thoughts do we need to know about from your data?
Gosh, I mean, those were the biggest pieces. I'm trying to think. We have certainly seen a shift from, I think, this is just in the industry in general, not so much even quoted, of just the shift in independent or like to independent outlets and the growth in independent outlets. So, less traditional media. We know that, look at, what was that, February, Washington Post laid off, hundreds of individuals. So you see these larger traditional newsrooms really shrinking and downsizing. But like I said, those journalists still need jobs. So you see a lot of those people shifting to in-house comms teams. You see a lot of those individuals shifting to freelance work and writing across multiple publications. But then you see a huge growth in Substacks, in YouTube.
Yep.
You see like a lot of smaller, more trade publications, things like that, really bringing on like in-house editors, which I think is great to see that shift. And like I said, keeping your options open when you are pitching, I think it does greatly benefit you, because many journalists now are not writing for one outlet. They're writing for many. So even if you are pitching them at a small publication right now, you can also catch them at the big publication when they really need help too. And they're going to be grateful for you no matter what time you're pitching them at. So a significant shift there. I think it's a lot about shifting the mindset, because even though we've seen a shift where we see more independent outlets kind of posting opportunities, needing sources and being available, and just, like how many podcasts are out there now and things like that. Even though we see that shift there, we still see that more pitches go to those traditional outlets. So that just means when you are pitching a New York Times opportunity, you're one against many, versus when you're pitching, something that's maybe a little bit smaller, maybe not as flashy, your success rate is likely higher, because it is, there's not as many people in there. You're not competing against one of 50 or 60, those people that are just pitching it because it is the New York Times, or you're not kind of competing against all the other experts and big brands in those spaces, because that's what everybody's kind of vying for.
We're all curious to see what the future holds. And in 10 years from now, will people even be discerning about what the New York Times or Wall Street Journal is covering, as opposed to what, their favorite content creator, influencer, or, other platform that has yet to come out? Or maybe it'll all be mostly, an AI aggregation of some sort where, maybe there's not the same, sole source of truth or credible media outlet versus, a variety of, bot reporting that happens or something like that. Who knows what the future is going to be like. But, I know my kids aren't aware or interested in, and they're young adults, in, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and the things that, when I grew up was what my parents and grandparents or business people that were older than me really cared about. Is this diversity and, fragmentation of the marketplace of news consumption. So it's all going to be an interesting, we are living in interesting times. This was a great conversation, Shelby, as always. I learned something every time I talk to you. And so I'm glad we got connected today. And thank you for helping our audience stay on top of PR. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really great. Glad we were finally able to make it happen.
Yeah, it was great. Glad to do it. Let's make sure we do it again soon.
Yeah, deal.
All right. Thank you to our audience for all your support of On Top of PR, which is now one of the top 2.5% of podcasts worldwide. If you would take a moment to leave us an online review, especially if you enjoyed this or another episode, we'd love to have you share your thoughts on our show so that you can help others become aware of our program and have them tune in to On Top of PR so we can continue to help them stay on top of PR. Thanks again, Shelby.
Thank you.
This has been On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by ReviewMaxer. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and check out past shows at ontopofpr.com.